The receptionist's voice cracked with a laugh before she caught herself. Wait, is this Ryan? You sound just like him. My name is Leo Hargrove, and that sentence is the exact place where my marriage ended, even though it would take another 6 weeks for either of us to say the word divorce out loud. I was standing in the garage with a phone pressed to my ear and a stack of insurance paperwork on the workbench in front of me, trying to sort out a billing discrepancy for my wife's physical therapy. Claire had been going to Cascade Physical Therapy and Wellness every other Tuesday for almost 2 years, a leftover injury from a car accident in her 20s, the kind of dull recurring pain that flares when the weather turns. I was 40 years old, a project manager who spent more hours at construction sites than at my own kitchen table, and until that phone call, I believed I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one, a good one. The receptionist's laugh died fast when I didn't answer. Sorry, you have a similar voice to someone who usually calls about her appointments. My mistake. I told her it was fine. I asked about the billing code that didn't match what our insurance company had on file. She went quiet for a second, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, and said she'd have to check something and call me back. She never called back. I called them instead, 3 days later, and a different person told me Claire hadn't had an active file at that clinic in 14 months. If you've ever had a small, ordinary task turn into the moment your whole life quietly tips over, you already know what that kind of silence feels like in your chest. I didn't understand yet what I was standing in the middle of. I just knew that something in the room had changed shape. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing who we were before that call. Claire and I met at a mutual friend's wedding 11 years ago in Boise, back when she still played competitive volleyball on weekends, and I still believe 40 was something that happened to other people. She had this laugh that filled a room without trying to. I fell for her in the unglamorous, completely ordinary way people fall for each other, slowly, and then all at once, over shared Sunday breakfasts and long drives with no destination. We got married 2 years later. Maya came 4 years after that. Wesley 2 years after Maya. I built a career climbing the ranks at a mid-sized construction firm, the kind of job that eats early mornings and late nights and calls it opportunity. Claire left her office job to stay home when Wesley was born, then eventually picked up part-time bookkeeping work she could do from the kitchen table between school pickups. I won't pretend I was blind to the distance that crept into our house over those years. I noticed it. I just filed it under things that happened to every marriage with young kids and one exhausted parent working 60-hour weeks. I told myself we'd get back to each other once the kids were older, once the promotion came through, once things slowed down. Maybe you've made that same bargain with your own life, trading the present for some easier future that never quite arrives on schedule. The old back injury started acting up again about 2 years before that phone call. Claire had been rear-ended in her 20s, a low-speed collision that left her with a stubborn ache that flared under stress or cold weather. She found a physical therapy clinic across town, Cascade, and started going every other Tuesday afternoon while the kids were at school. I remember being relieved, honestly. Relieved that she was taking care of herself. Relieved that it was one less thing on my plate to think about. She'd come home from those Tuesday sessions a little brighter than usual. I told myself that was just what relief from chronic pain looked like. I didn't know it yet, but the billing discrepancy on that insurance statement wasn't the strangest thing I'd find in the weeks that followed. After the call with the clinic, I did what I imagine most people do in that situation. I looked for the boring explanation first. Insurance companies mix up files constantly. Maybe Claire had switched providers within the same practice, or maybe there'd been a clerical error when they migrated to a new system. I told myself this before I told myself anything worse. That night I asked her, as casually as I could manage while loading the dishwasher, how physical therapy was going. She said fine, same as always. Tuesday guy is finally making progress on her lower back. Tuesday guy? Not a name I recognized, though I realized in that moment I'd never actually asked for one. 11 years married, and I couldn't have told you the name of the person treating my wife's chronic pain twice a month. Cascade's still working out okay? I asked, watching her face more than I usually would. Yeah, why? She didn't look up from the plate she was rinsing. I told her the insurance company was being difficult about a billing code. Nothing to worry about. I'd handle it. She said okay and moved on to the next plate. If you've ever watched someone's face for a reaction and gotten nothing at all, you know how unsettling that particular kind of nothing can be. Not because it proves anything, because it doesn't disprove anything either. I let it go for a week. I had a site inspection running behind schedule, two subcontractors threatening to walk off a job over a payment dispute, and a project deadline that ate every spare hour I had. I told myself I'd deal with the insurance thing when things calmed down. That's the workaholic in me. Always convinced that the real problem could wait until the fake emergency at work got handled first. I've had a lot of time since then to understand that pattern in myself, and not much of it flattering. Claire's Tuesdays continued like clockwork. She'd leave around 1, come back around 3:30, sometimes with a stop at the grocery store folded into the trip. Nothing about the rhythm of it seemed different from any other week in the past 2 years. That was, I'd come to understand, exactly the point. It was Maya who gave me the next thread to pull, though neither of us understood it at the time. She was drawing at the kitchen table one evening, and she mentioned, completely offhand, the way 9-year-olds mention things, that mommy's phone made a weird buzzy sound in her purse sometimes, like a heartbeat, and that mommy always got up and left the room when it did that. What kind of buzzy sound? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Maya shrugged, already back to her drawing. I don't know. 2 buzzes, then it stops, then 2 more. A pattern. Someone using a specific ringtone or vibration pattern to signal something. Maybe, or maybe I was building a conspiracy out of a 9-year-old's imagination and an ordinary phone notification. I told myself it was probably nothing. I have found, since then, that probably nothing is a phrase people use most often in the exact moments it matters most. I didn't think much more about it that night. I should have. It would be almost 3 weeks before I understood why that detail mattered. Around that same time, I noticed Claire had started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered, something she'd never done before, and that she'd started keeping it face down on the counter rather than propped up where she could see notifications, which had always been her habit. Small changes. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you happened to be paying closer attention than usual, which, thanks to that insurance call still humming somewhere in the back of my mind, I was. There's a particular kind of dread that doesn't announce itself as dread. It just sits quietly under your ribs while you go about your day, and you don't recognize it for what it is until much later. I felt that for the first time on a Tuesday evening in March, watching Claire come through the front door with grocery bags and a smile that seemed, for just a fraction of a second before she saw me, aimed at something that wasn't in the room. I didn't know it then, but that smile, the one that dropped half a degree the moment she registered I was standing there, was the first honest thing I'd see from her in 2 years. I called the insurance company back myself in early April, this time asking for a supervisor and giving them every scrap of information I had, policy number, dates of service, the provider ID. The woman on the line was patient but firm. Claire Hargrove's last documented visit to Cascade Physical Therapy and Wellness was 14 months prior. Before that, the file showed a regular bi-weekly pattern going back almost a full year, consistent with the original injury treatment. Then it just stopped. 14 months. That put the cutoff right around the time Claire had mentioned switching to a new therapist within the same practice. Someone named Ryan. She'd said once, months back, when I'd asked in passing how her sessions were going. I remembered it now with a clarity that made my stomach turn. Ryan. The same name the receptionist had mistaken me for on the phone. I want to stop here for a second because I think some of you already know this feeling. The one where you have a piece of information sitting right in front of you, obvious in hindsight, and you still find a way to talk yourself out of what it's telling you. Not because you're stupid, because the alternative costs more than you're ready to pay yet. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my own job site for 20 minutes that afternoon, engine off, just staring at nothing, trying to construct a version of events where none of this meant what it so clearly meant. Maybe Ryan wasn't a real physical therapist. Maybe he was a friend she saw for coffee and used the appointment as cover because our marriage had gotten so distant that she felt she needed an excuse to have 2 hours to herself. That thought should have alarmed me as much as the other one. It didn't, not enough. I was still bargaining. I started noticing things I'd apparently trained myself not to notice for months. Claire had lost weight, not dramatically, but enough that her wedding ring had started to slip slightly on her finger, and she'd taken to wearing it on a chain some days instead, which she explained as her fingers swelling in the heat. She'd started listening to a new playlist in the car, music that wasn't hers, moody and unfamiliar, and when I asked about it once, she said a coworker had recommended it. She'd also started taking longer in the bathroom before bed, and coming out smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize. something warmer and muskier than the light citrus scent she'd worn for years. I asked her about the perfume directly, once, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. New scent. Sample from the drugstore, she said. Wanted to change. People change their perfume all the time. I told myself that. I also noticed, the following Tuesday, that she left the house at 12:40 instead of her usual 1 o'clock, and didn't come back until nearly 4, a full 90 minutes longer than her typical appointment window, which even with a stop at the store had never run past 3:30 before. That was the moment the ground under me shifted for the first time. Not confirmation, not proof, just the unmistakable sense that the story I'd been telling myself about my marriage no longer matched the evidence in front of me. If I had checked her mileage that night instead of 3 days later, I might have caught her in a lie before she had time to smooth the edges of it. I checked the odometer against a note I'd jotted down the week before, an old habit from managing job site vehicles, tracking mileage without even thinking about it. The numbers didn't add up to a round trip across town to Cascade. They added up to something closer to 40 extra miles. 40 miles round trip doesn't get you to a physical therapy clinic 9 minutes from our house. It gets you somewhere else entirely. I told myself I needed to be careful, methodical, the same way I'd approach a problem at a job site. Gather the facts before drawing conclusions, because accusing someone based on an assumption you can't back up is how you destroy something you might not actually need to destroy. That discipline, I think, is the only reason I didn't blow the whole thing up in the kitchen the night I found the mileage discrepancy. Instead, I started keeping a private log. Dates, times, mileage, anything unusual. It felt clinical and cold, and some nights I hated myself for doing it, for turning my own marriage into a surveillance project instead of just sitting Claire down and asking her directly what was going on. But some part of me, the part that had spent 2 decades managing high-stakes projects, understood that if I confronted her without proof, she would simply deny it, smooth it over, and I'd be left with nothing but my own doubt to carry around for the rest of our marriage. The next Tuesday, I told Claire I had a site walkthrough that would keep me out most of the afternoon. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did have a walkthrough, just not one that would take 4 hours. I drove past our own street around 1:15 and saw her car already gone from the driveway. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because it's the one decision in this whole story I still turn over uneasily, even now. I drove to a strip mall parking lot 2 blocks from a coffee shop Claire had mentioned once or twice as a place she liked, and I waited. Not proud of it. Not sure, even now, what I would have done differently, but I understand why some of you might question that choice, the same way I question it myself some nights. She wasn't at the coffee shop. At 1:50, her car pulled into the lot of a mid-rise apartment building 3 blocks further down, the kind with covered parking and a keypad entry. I watched her park, check her phone, then walk toward the entrance with a lightness in her step I hadn't seen directed at our own front door in longer than I wanted to admit. I sat in my truck outside that building for 2 hours. She didn't come out until nearly 4. That's when I finally did what I probably should have done from the start. I went home, opened my laptop, and pulled up 2 years of bank and credit card statements, something I'd never bothered scrutinizing closely because Claire handled most of the household bookkeeping herself. One of the ironies of this whole situation that I still can't quite get past. Buried in a checking account I rarely touched, I found recurring charges to a payment app, small amounts, $20 or $40 at a time, sent every couple of weeks to a name I didn't recognize. Talbot. Ryan Talbot. I found him in under 10 minutes once I had the name. A personal trainer and part-time yoga instructor, 34 years old, with a public social media account full of gym mirror photos and inspirational captions about showing up for yourself. Nothing about physical therapy. Nothing about Cascade. I found one photo, half hidden behind a stack of other tagged posts from a mutual friend's birthday party 18 months earlier. Claire in the background, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on his shoulder in a way that a stranger might read as nothing and a husband reads as everything. I sat with that photo for a long time. Then I found something that reframed everything I thought I understood about the timeline. A calendar app on our shared family iPad, one Claire rarely used, but that still synced automatically, showed a recurring event stretching back nearly 2 full years, not 14 months, not since Ryan replaced some anonymous first therapist, but from the very beginning. Every appointment for 2 years marked simply PT, 1 p.m., except that the location pin attached to 6 of the more recent entries wasn't Cascade's address at all. It was the apartment building I'd sat outside 3 hours earlier. 2 years, not 14 months. The entire premise I'd built my suspicion around, a switch from an innocent original therapist to something else, collapsed in an instant. There had never been an innocent version of this. It had started at the very beginning, the very first Tuesday, back when I still thought I understood exactly what kind of woman I'd married. I didn't confront her that night. I want you to understand that wasn't restraint, exactly. It was the same instinct that made me build the mileage log in the first place. I needed everything laid out, undeniable, before I gave her the chance to talk her way around it. I printed the bank statements. I saved the calendar entries as screenshots. I wrote down the dates, the mileage discrepancies, the receptionist's slip on the phone. I put it all in a folder and waited 3 days, going through the ordinary motions of our life. Dinner, homework help, bedtime stories for Wesley, with a folder sitting in my truck like a loaded question I hadn't asked yet. On Friday night, after the kids were asleep, I set the folder on the kitchen table and asked Claire to sit down. I laid it out piece by piece, the way I'd walk a contractor through a failed inspection, quiet, factual, no raised voice. The receptionist's call. The insurance record showing 2 years, not 14 months. The mileage. The apartment building. The payment app transactions to R. Talbot. The calendar entries with the location pin that didn't match the clinic's address. I didn't accuse. I just placed each piece down and let her look at it. Explain this to me, I said. Whatever it is. I want to hear it from you before I decide what it means. She went pale, then color came back to her face in a rush, and she reached for the folder like she could somehow undo what was printed on the pages by touching them. This isn't. You don't understand what you're looking at, she said. Ryan's a friend. We've been going to lunch sometimes after my session. That's all this is. You're building a whole story out of a friendship. I asked her to explain the location pin on the calendar, the one that matched an apartment building and not a clinic. She said the app must have glitched, autofilled the wrong address from some prior search. I asked about the 2-year timeline instead of the 14 months she'd led me to believe. She said the clinic must have restructured their files at some point, that she genuinely thought she'd been going the whole time, that the insurance company was probably confused. Each explanation arrived a little faster than the last, a little less examined, the kind of story someone builds in real time because they never expected to need one. If you've ever watched someone reconstruct the truth right in front of you, piece by piece, contradicting themselves as they go, you know that particular kind of vertigo, the sense that the ground you're standing on is being rewritten as you watch. $20, $40, every 2 weeks, for 2 years, I said, sliding the bank printout toward her. To him. For what? Gas money. Lunch. I don't remember every single transaction. Leo, do you remember every charge on your card for 2 years? I felt something in me go very still and very quiet. Not the explosion I might have expected from myself. Not tears, just a kind of methodical clarity, like watching a building I designed reveal a structural flaw I should have caught in the blueprints. I kept going. I asked about the 90 extra minutes on the Tuesday I tracked her mileage. I asked why, if Ryan was just a friend. She'd never once mentioned his name to me in 2 years except that single time in passing, months back. Ryan, the new therapist, said like it meant nothing. She minimized. She reframed. She told me I was overreacting, that a marriage under this kind of scrutiny would make anyone look guilty of something, that I'd been distant for years and now, the one time she'd found a friend who made her feel like herself again, I was turning it into a crime scene. She never once said the word affair. She never once denied being at that apartment. She simply kept sliding around the shape of what had happened, offering me a dozen smaller, more survivable stories instead of the one true one. I told her I needed some air, and I walked out to the garage. The same garage where, weeks earlier, a receptionist's slip of the tongue had first cracked this open, and I sat on the tailgate of my truck in the cold for almost an hour, staring at nothing, waiting to feel something resolve. It didn't. Some of you already know that feeling. When you finally have the truth, and it doesn't arrive with relief, only a different, heavier kind of weight. She didn't come out to find me. When I went back inside, she was already in bed, the light off, her back to my side of the room. Neither of us said anything else that night. The following 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. A marriage running on autopilot, breakfasts and school drop-offs and homework help happening exactly as they always had, while underneath it, everything had already ended and neither of us had said so out loud yet. I moved into the guest room. Claire didn't ask me to move back. It was on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday, 12 days after the confrontation, that she finally told me the truth, and not because I asked again. I hadn't. I'd stopped asking. I think that silence did more than any question could have. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd laid out the folder, and she said she needed to tell me everything. Actually, everything this time, because she was tired of carrying the version she'd been telling. It started small, she told me. The first few sessions with Ryan really were just physical therapy. But he was easy to talk to in a way that felt different from anything at home. Not because he was better than you, Leo, but because he was there. Fully there, in the room, in a way I hadn't felt in years. One day after a session, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee instead of driving straight home, and I told myself it was nothing, just two people talking. I told myself that for a long time. I told myself it every single time, right up until it wasn't true anymore. The first time we crossed a line, I remember driving home after and rehearsing what I'd say if you asked why I was late, even though you never asked, and that scared me more than the thing itself. How easy it was to just have an answer ready. After that, I kept telling myself it would be the last time. I said that to myself probably 30 times over 2 years. Every single time I believed it a little less. I was terrified of you finding out, terrified of losing the kids' respect, terrified of becoming the kind of person I'd have judged 5 years ago. Some days I'd come home and look at Maya's drawings on the fridge and physically couldn't look at them straight on, like they'd know just by me looking. I started avoiding the fridge altogether, if you want to know something small and stupid that tells you everything. But underneath all of it was something I didn't say to you, because I didn't fully understand it myself until I said it out loud just now. I felt like I'd disappeared somewhere around the time Wesley was born. Not because of you, not entirely. But I became the kid's mom and the house person, and I stopped being anyone else. And Ryan was the first person in years who looked at me like I was still someone. That doesn't make it right. I know that. But that's the truth of it. Finally, without the version I kept building to protect myself. I listened to all of it without interrupting. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes after finally hearing the whole truth instead of a defensible fraction of it. Not peace. Not yet. Just the quiet of a question that had finally stopped needing to be asked. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Claire didn't contest much of it. I suspect some combination of guilt and exhaustion made the fight go out of her faster than either of us expected. I got primary custody of Maya and Wesley, with Claire keeping regular weekend visits. I kept the house. Ryan Talbot's own long-term relationship, I later learned through a mutual acquaintance, ended within months of the truth becoming public knowledge in our social circle. His own carefully built image, it turned out, hadn't survived contact with what he'd actually done either. Claire lost more than the marriage. She lost the version of herself she'd been trying to protect by lying, and she lost the trust of 2 kids who, even now, ask harder questions than she's fully ready to answer. I still think sometimes about that receptionist's voice on the phone, the honest mistake that unraveled 2 years of careful architecture in under 30 seconds. I used to think about the version of that day where I hung up, didn't call back, let the billing error go unresolved the way I'd let so many smaller things go unresolved in that marriage. I don't know how much longer it would have taken me to find the truth on my own. I don't know if I ever would have. The most painful detail in this story isn't the affair itself. It's that Claire's transformation happened almost entirely in plain sight, disguised as self-care, and Leo mistook her absence for her well-being. He was relieved she was finally taking care of herself, never once asking who was doing the caring or what it was costing him to not know. That's the quiet tragedy underneath the betrayal. 2 years of a marriage running on the assumption that someone getting better meant nothing needed to change. What this story reveals about deception is that it rarely announces itself in dramatic moments. It accumulates in small administrative gaps. A billing code, a mileage discrepancy, a calendar location pin that didn't match. None of these were dramatic on their own. Together, they formed a structure Claire had unknowingly left standing for anyone who looked closely enough. Leo's instinct to gather proof methodically, rather than confront emotionally, protected him from being talked out of his own perception, a pattern many people in his position don't have the discipline to hold on to. Claire's confession complicates the story without excusing it. Her loneliness was real. So was her choice to resolve it through 2 years of calculated deception rather than an honest conversation with the man she married. Both things can be true. The story doesn't ask you to forgive her. It asks you to notice how ordinary the beginning of her unraveling was, how it started with a single unremarkable coffee and a story told to herself 30 separate times before it stopped feeling like a lie. What lingers longest isn't the discovery. It's the 12 days of silence that followed it. Two people finishing breakfast, packing lunches, functioning as a family that had already ended because neither of them was ready to say so out loud. Maybe that's the part worth sitting with. I think about those 12 days more than almost anything else in this story. Not the confrontation, not the folder on the kitchen table, the quiet after, when we both already knew and neither of us said it. If you've ever lived inside an ending before you were ready to name it, you understand exactly the kind of silence I mean. What hurts most, looking back, isn't that Claire lied. It's that I'd stopped paying close enough attention to notice the shape of a woman who felt invisible in her own home, long before Ryan ever entered the picture. That doesn't make what she did right, but it makes it something I have to sit with, too. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's that the red flags rarely look like red flags while they're happening. They look like relief. They look like someone finally taking care of themselves. Pay attention anyway. If someone let you down, or you've ever ignored a red flag because the truth felt heavier than the silence, tell me one word in the comments that describes it. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who stood in that kind of quiet. Thank you for staying with this one all the way through.